I'm glad I know you.
Glad I know you, Father. So glad I know you.
Lord, you're a close friend of mine. Oh yeah. My plea, my plea, my plea.
The church is the light that can't be hid. Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16.
Not my will, but thine.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning. We are certainly delighted to have all of you join us in this workshop on this morning. Enjoyed myself as part of that first group. We had a very exciting time talking about this very critical topic. How many preachers do we have in the house? Raise your hand, preachers. Okay. All right. Any elders in the house? Faithful brethren. I guess that's the rest of them. You got the faithful brethren. All right. This workshop is designed for preachers, elders, and faithful brethren. So that pretty much gets everybody there. But I guess the subject matter is of most interest and concern, I think, to those of us who are in the pulpit. And by the way, who is that man in the pulpit? Who is that man in the pulpit? Man of God. He's man of God, you see. You know, several designations, you know, for the person we call preacher. I think among us, that's probably the most common way of referring to that man in the pulpit. He's a preacher. But there are other ways in which he's referred to. Paul, of course, wrote 3 books of the New Testament and devoted them exclusively or entirely for the instruction of this man that stands in the pulpit. He was outlining, of course, the work that he is to do, the attitudes that he should have, having him to understand where his confidence is to come from, how to be an evangelist, how to make full proof of his ministry. So Paul used 3 other titles in addition to the title of preacher. He referred to Timothy as an evangelist. He also referred to him as a minister. And Timothy and Titus, of course, putting both of those books together. But the term or the title that is most captivating and should be perhaps to you as well is the title Man of God. And it's probably the most least appreciated and probably the most misunderstood of all the titles that by which that man in the pulpit is known. Man of God. We have a habit of calling any faithful brother a man of God. That's not a sin that's going to cause you to lose your salvation, but it may cause you to really lose the appreciation for that man that stands in the pulpit. Every faithful brother is not man of God. Paul used it in reference to the evangelist. And the title was first used, of course, in regards to Moses. Moses is what I call the prototypical man of God. And if you want to know what a man of God is, you have to go and look at Moses, because he's the first one to be called man of God. Some of you will recognize that as the first law of hermeneutics, or one of the laws of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, of course, is the science of biblical interpretation. And so the law of first mention is important, and I think it's a law that we have failed to embrace as much as we probably should in the Lord's church, because it would deepen your understanding of almost everything, if I might be so bold as to say that, of almost everything. And just to kind of illustrate how the law of first mention is useful, if someone comes up to you, let's say you landed on this planet from outer space, and they start talking to you about an ark, an A-R-K. Well, if they've never seen one, they've never heard of one, it's going to be difficult for them to appreciate the usefulness of it, what it does, purpose of it, etc. So if he had seen an ark, and you go back and show him an ark, you go back and show him the ark in the Old Testament, then he'll see then that it was built by the instructions of God, that all the people who were saved in the flood were in that ark. And so the ark then begins to take on a kind of connotation, a kind of meaning. Y'all get it? So when you hear the law first mentioned, hear the term man of God, and you go back and look for the man of God, you find Moses, and you find him doing certain things. Yeah. And you find him filling certain positions and roles in the scheme of things and in God's plan to redeem man. And so that's kind of where we're coming from when we talk about the prototypical role of Moses. A lot can be learned about this person we call the preacher by looking at his prototype. Now, he has other predecessors, and those other predecessors, of course, are the prophet and the priest. You are, if you're a preacher, you are the prophet and the priest is your predecessor. Now, I think we can most readily identify with the prophet, but not so much the priest. Now, we're all priests. Amen. Amen. We're all priests. But the predecessor to the office of the evangelist, of the man of God, is folded. This office, folded into that, is previously the office of the prophet, the function of the prophet, and also the function of the priest. Priest's primary role was that of a teacher. Okay? Just take note of that. I'm in my preliminaries and I'm trying to get somewhere. And if I'm not careful, I spend more time in my preliminaries than I have time left. And that almost happened to me in my last session. But the man of God is the one whose role and responsibility most closely aligns with the prophet and the priest. And of course, Moses is the man of God in the Old Testament. And as I said a minute ago, the primary responsibility of the priest was to teach the people the laws and commandments, ways of Jehovah their God. Deuteronomy 24 and verse 7, 2 Kings 17, 27, 2 Chronicles 15 and verse 3. Those are your references. I don't want to spend so much time there, but you'll find that these will bear out the fact that the primary role of the priest was to teach. Yes, he was to attend to the services of the temple and the tabernacle, but that was not all that he did. It was not just ritualistic things. When the people that were left in the land after captivity, after the bulk of the people went into captivity, the people that were left in the land, the people that were transplanted there, didn't understand the ways of the God Jehovah. And the king said, send a priest down there so that he might teach them the ways of Jehovah. Okay? 1 Corinthians 9 is our launching pad for this discussion, when we talk about the man of God and his maintenance. Now, 1 Corinthians 9, of course, written by the Apostle Paul, and we look at the background of this epistle, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, where all the epistles in the New Testament were written primarily, except for one or two general epistles, was written to address specific problems. Okay? So whatever was going on down there in Corinth, Paul, being the one who planted that church, and being an apostle of Jesus Christ, of course, wrote a letter in order to correct certain things and to deal with attitudes and digressions that were going on down in Corinth. This is the passage that we're using as our launching pad. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 13. Do you not know that they which minister about holy things live of the things of the temple? And they which wait at the altar are partakers with the altar. Partakers with the altar. That's powerful stuff. Even so, in the same manner, likewise, hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel.
Yeah.
There's no passage, perhaps, in the New Testament that is a stronger statement of the rights, privileges
That's right.
of the man of God.
That's right.
And that's why they gave me this passage. And this is why I chose it. If they hadn't given it to me, I was going to find a way to use it anyway. But the background to 2 Corinthians, Paul is defending himself against certain allegations that are made about him.
That's right.
Allegation was that he was not an apostle. Can you imagine? Well, Paul was one born what? But he was an apostle, and he had to defend against these accusations. One of the accusations leveled against Paul was that he had no letters of recommendation from the leaders in the Jerusalem church. Can you imagine you plant a church, baptize most of the folk there, and then they start questioning your credentials, questioning whether or not you are a man of God, questioning whether or not you are an apostle because somebody down in Jerusalem didn't write a letter of commendation. There was an accusation that the churches that Paul planted were inferior churches. Well, if you're not a genuine apostle, then your work is inferior. He was weak, ineffective in his public speaking. And then this is the one that we're going to center in on. He took no salary. Well, if he took no salary, he must not be worth much.
Yeah.
You know, there were some who were saying Paul is nothing. Paul, you're nothing. And part of the reason they're saying this is because Paul took no salary. Now, it was true that he took no salary from the church at Corinth. He took no salary from the churches in Ephesus or Thessalonica. But how many of you know that he received support time and time again from the church at Philippi?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So something needs to be examined a little closer. Now, he supported himself in Ephesus, in Ephesus, in Corinth, and also in Thessalonica by plying his trade. Paul was a what?
Tent maker.
He was a tent maker. Paul made tents. And this accusation leveled against him that he cannot be genuine, he must not be a real apostle because he took no compensation for what he did. That's not totally out of the range of our thinking and imagination. How many of you have done service for people and took no compensation for it?
Yes, sir.
I said that in the last session and people were real quiet. I got scared. Yeah, I've done service and took no compensation.
Yes.
It wasn't always voluntary.
Yeah.
Anybody here did a meeting, got home, and before you left home, you didn't get your compensation? Huh?
Yeah.
But voluntarily, there was a time in my ministry when I, early on, not so long ago, I would try to do at least one meeting for people who otherwise could not afford to pay me to do the meeting.
Yeah.
So that magnanimity, and is not uncommon among preachers. People who love souls, people who love people, people who want to see the kingdom grow, are willing, as Paul says, to spend and be spent for the cause of Christ. But this is the passage in Philippians 4:15 and 16, 15 and 16, where Paul says that you know that from the beginning of the gospel, when I began my ministry, when I departed from Macedonia, he said, no church communicated with me.
Yes, sir.
He's not talking about picked up the phone and called me. He's talking about no one gave me remuneration. as concerned, of course, giving and receiving, but you only. The church at Philippi was very dear to Paul. They loved Paul. They cherished him. They were very concerned about him. And so if no one would do anything for him, they were going to do it.
Yeah.
He says, for even in Thessalonica, you sent once and again unto my necessity. Once and again. I heard Brother S.T.W. Gibbs in a meeting in Albany, Georgia, talking about that one time. And he says, the Philippian brethren supported Paul not one time, but once and again. And again, and again.
Yeah.
So how often, preacher, are you going to come asking for this?
Yeah.
Again and again. 1 Corinthians 9:16 through 18, Paul says, for if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast about. Now this gets to Paul's unique mindset. Paul saw his reward coming from somewhere other than the remuneration that he would get from money and etc. He says, I'm under compulsion. If I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast about. How many of you know Paul didn't volunteer to become a preacher? Maybe you haven't thought about it. But Paul didn't volunteer to become a preacher.
No, he didn't.
Paul was attacked, wrestled to the ground. We're not used to thinking about quite that way, but listen to the man. He says, now, if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast about because I'm under compulsion. I'm compelled to do it. I think about Jonah. Jonah was compelled. God told Jonah, you go to Nineveh. Jonah said, nah. And he went the other way, didn't he? But there was a compulsion on him. And God finally got his attention. And when that fish spit him out, he hit the ground running. Huh? Paul says there's a compulsion. For woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. Woe unto Jonah if he preach not the gospel. There's a fish waiting on you. He says, for if I do this, what? Voluntarily, I have a reward. If I do it voluntarily, I have a reward. Reward is the same word for wages. Same word for wages. For if I do it voluntarily, I have wages. But if against my will, and it is against his will, he's already said, I'm not doing this voluntarily, I'm under compulsion. If I do it voluntarily, then I have wages. I expect wages. Wages are completely in line with what my situation. But he says, if against my will, well, I have a stewardship entrusted unto me. If against my will, I'm still going to preach. If it's the fact that I didn't volunteer to do this, I'm still going to preach. Because woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. What then is my reward? He's saying, now, I have a reward. But I'm telling you about a true reward. What is your reward, Paul? He says, when I preach the gospel, I offer the gospel without charge. That energized him. Whenever he preached the gospel and there was no remuneration, he was proud to say, I preached the gospel with no remuneration. Don't y'all get nervous. I know. Y'all saying, well, is this what this is about? We don't get no remuneration. Paul's ministry is unique. His calling is unique. And he says, when I preach the gospel, I may offer the gospel without charge. Watch this. So as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. Paul says, I left something on the table. Huh? Don't ever get the mindset where you got to get everything on the table. You know what he means, okay. Well, I said, I want everything coming to me. You might not want everything coming.
Amen.
Paul was not preaching voluntarily, but under compulsion. He often referred to himself as a bond servant. Isn't that right? You know, a bond servant is a slave. I mean, you know, slaves don't wait to payday. Slaves not standing in line for payday. Slaves don't get paid, right? Slaves don't expect to get paid for their service. His calling was a calling of suffering. Paul was uniquely, now all the apostles suffered. Most of them suffered martyrdom, except for perhaps John, right? Peter allegedly crucified upside down.
Yeah.
The matter became of critical importance to the disciples on one occasion. They said, Jesus had insinuated or implied that all of them were going to die, and he hadn't said nothing about John. And they said, what about that one? Jesus said, what's it to you? If he remains till I come, that's not your course in life. That's not your business. But he willingly accepted his calling. Acts 9:16, you remember Jesus says, I must show him what things he must suffer for my name's sake. He's a chosen vessel. He shall bear my name before kings. Paul wore that like a badge of honor. Paul said, I would much rather glory in my sufferings because I'm an apostle called to suffer. But you have to be careful about a martyr's complex.
All right.
You know, this is unique to Paul. Paul's calling is unique. Okay, there was nobody like the Apostle Paul. Nobody suffered like Paul either. Huh? So, though it was not a voluntary service, he accepted it as a stewardship. And you remember he wrote to the church at Corinth and he said, moreover, it is required in stewards that they be found what? Faithful. So Paul wanted to be faithful. I fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. I finished my course. So he faithfully carried out his apostleship.